Good evening, everyone. We spend our lives constructing a sense of who we are. We build an identity from our relationships, our achievements, our values, and our roles. But that construction is never entirely secure. There are forces that can crack it, sometimes shatter it. Tonight, we are going to explore what happens when our self-concept comes under threat and what we can do to survive and rebuild. Psychologists identify 3 major sources of threat to self-worth. The first is failures, a failed exam, a business that collapses, a relationship that ends. The second is inconsistencies, unexpected events that force us to question who we thought we were. The third is stressors, bereavement, serious illness, or chronic overwork. What these threats share is that they trigger powerful negative emotions, shame, anxiety, grief, and they don't just wound us psychologically. They can contribute to physical illness and even affect immune system functioning, for example, by reducing the activity of natural killer cells that defend our body. To understand this, I want to take you deep into one person's experience. Because sometimes a single story can illuminate the entire architecture of a psychological theory. Maya, the partner who wasn't who she thought. Maya had always defined herself as a loyal, trusting, and deeply loved wife. She and her husband had been together since university. Their relationship was not just a part of her life, it was a core pillar of her identity. She was, in her own mind, a woman who had built a good marriage, a safe home, a shared history that nothing could erode. Then, one evening, she picked up his phone to check a message from their son's school and found a series of intimate messages revealing a year-long affair. The discovery didn't just break her heart. It shattered her sense of reality. She found herself asking, "If I was so wrong about him, what else am I wrong about? Am I a fool? Was our whole marriage a lie I told myself?" This is the power of an inconsistency threat. The revelation of infidelity created a devastating gap between her self-concept as a beloved partner and the brutal evidence of betrayal. Maya had built her identity on a story, and now that story had collapsed. The consequences were not just emotional. She experienced panic attacks that left her gasping for air. She developed chronic tension headaches that throbbed behind her eyes from morning to night. And then, in the midst of the turmoil, she was diagnosed with shingles, a reactivation of the varicella virus that lies dormant in the body and erupts when acute psychological stress compromises cellular immunity. Her self-concept had been ruptured and her body was paying the price. Maya's case illustrates the full cascade. An inconsistency in her self-concept triggered overwhelming negative emotions, which in turn contributed to physical symptoms and immune suppression. The mind and body are not separate systems. A threat to who we think we are can make us literally sick. How we cope: 5 strategies for surviving a self-concept threat. But Maya did not remain in that shattered state forever. Human beings are remarkably resilient, and psychology has mapped the strategies we use, consciously or unconsciously, to cope when our self-concept is under attack. 5 major strategies have been identified: escape, denial, downplaying the threat, self-expression, and attacking the threat. Let us walk through each, using Maya's own journey to see how they work, for better or worse. 1. Escape: physically removing herself from the threat. In the immediate hours after finding the messages, Maya felt the walls of the family home closing in. Every room held a memory of the marriage she now questioned: the kitchen where they cooked together on Sunday mornings, the bedroom where they had whispered their future plans, the framed wedding photos lining the hallway. That first night, she couldn't breathe. She packed a small bag, drove to her sister's apartment an hour away, and slept in the spare room. She did not answer her husband's calls for 3 days. This is escape, physically removing oneself from the threat situation. The physical distance did not solve the problem. The affair was still real, the marriage still in ruins. But it removed her from the relentless trigger, his presence, their shared space, the visual reminders of a life that now felt like a deception. It gave her nervous system a temporary reprieve. Escape is not a long-term solution, but it can buy the time needed before any deeper processing can begin. Sometimes you must step away before you can step toward. 2. Denial, using substances or risky behavior. A few weeks later, Maya hit a low point. She began pouring a large glass of wine earlier and earlier in the evening, telling herself it took the edge off the panic that surged every time she was alone with her thoughts. One night, after a furious phone call with her husband, she finished an entire bottle alone, then drove to a bar she had never been to, letting a stranger buy her drinks until the room blurred. She woke up the next morning with a pounding headache, a blank spot in her memory, and a fresh wave of shame that had nothing to do with her husband and everything to do with herself. This is denial through substances, one of the least constructive coping strategies. The alcohol temporarily numbed the emotional agony, but it also made her unsafe, impaired her judgment, and deepened her sense of self-betrayal. Denial, whether through alcohol, drugs, or other forms of risky escape, does not heal. It postpones, and the bill that comes due later is often larger. Maya recognized this quickly and pulled back, but the episode taught her how seductive and how hollow such avoidance could be. 3. Downplay the threat, reevaluating and self-affirmation. As the weeks passed, Maya began to do something psychologically sophisticated. She began to shift her internal narrative. First, she reevaluated the importance of the threatened identity. She asked herself, was our marriage really as perfect as I told myself? He was emotionally absent for years. Maybe I was in love with a story, not a person. This was not self-deception, it was a recalibration. By questioning whether the marriage had ever been the central pillar she believed it to be, she reduced the magnitude of the threat. She also engaged in self-affirmation. She wrote a list on her phone. I am a devoted mother. I am a respected architect. I am the friend who shows up in a crisis. I am the daughter who called her father every single day in his last year. None of this erased the pain of the affair, but it repositioned it. The marriage was one part of her identity, not the whole foundation. Her self-worth, she realized, had other pillars. Downplaying the threat by diversifying her sense of self is a powerful, evidence-based strategy. It does not deny the loss, it puts it in perspective. 4. Self-expression, writing and talking to heal. On her therapist's recommendation, Maya started a daily practice. Every evening, she sat for 20 minutes and wrote without censoring herself. She wrote about the rage, the humiliation, the fear of being alone at 50, the guilty moments of relief that the marriage might actually be over. She wrote letters she would never send to her husband, to the other woman, to the younger version of herself who had believed so completely in her happy ending. She also joined a small support group for women navigating infidelity and discovered that speaking her story aloud and hearing others speak theirs reduced the shame to a manageable size. The research here is compelling. The psychologist James Pennebaker found in 1997 that writing or talking about traumatic experiences improves not just psychological understanding but also immune function. When we put language to chaos, we begin to organize it. The formless dread becomes a narrative, and a narrative can be processed. Maya noticed that her sleep began to improve and the tension headaches became less frequent. The act of self-expression was not just cathartic. It was physically restorative. 5. Attack the threat, discrediting, denying responsibility, and taking control. Finally, Maya refused to remain a passive victim. When her husband attempted to shift blame, saying the affair was a response to her emotional distance and their stale marriage, she rejected the framing outright. I was in the same marriage you were, she told him. I didn't cheat. You made a choice. That is not on me. In this move, she denied responsibility for his betrayal, protecting herself from the corrosive belief that she had somehow caused her own abandonment. She also began to discredit the basis of the threat. You were never the man I thought you were. The affair isn't evidence that I'm unlovable. It's evidence that you are dishonest. This reframing is psychologically vital. Instead of the betrayal being a verdict on her worth, it became evidence of his character. And then she took direct control. She hired a lawyer, initiated a separation agreement, and decided to keep the family home. By acting rather than reacting, she transformed the threat from something that was happening to her into a problem she could manage. Her self-concept began to shift from betrayed wife to woman rebuilding her life on her own terms. What we take with us. Maya's journey through the aftermath of infidelity illuminates a universal truth. Threats to our self-concept are inevitable. We will all face failures, inconsistencies, and stressors that shake the foundations of who we think we are. The question is not whether we will be threatened, but how we will respond. The 5 strategies we've explored are all available to us. Some, like escape, can provide necessary temporary relief, but they are not solutions. Others, like denial through substances, are actively destructive. The healthier path lies in the remaining strategies, downplaying the threat by diversifying our sense of self and affirming other sources of worth. Engaging in self-expression through writing or talking, which heals both mind and body, and attacking the threat directly by refusing misplaced blame, discrediting the basis of the wound, and taking control of what we can. Maya's body told the story first: the panic, the headaches, the shingles, because a self-concept under siege is not just a psychological event. It is a whole-body crisis. But her recovery also tells a story. She rebuilt, not by pretending the wound didn't happen, but by processing it, reframing it, and ultimately acting upon it. Her identity did not return to what it was. It evolved into something more spacious, more resilient, and more truly her own. And that, perhaps, is the deepest lesson. A self-concept that has survived threat and been consciously rebuilt is not weaker for the cracks. It is stronger because it has been tested and it is held. Thank you.